everybody. This is Ahmed. Here it is Tuesday, April 30th, talking about the student protests all over, spreading all over the campus in the United States. Not just in the United States, all over the world, except in the Arab world. It's amazing what those students are doing. It's almost a reminder of what's going on in the 60s during the Vietnamese War. These students are probably the only segment of society here that are actually can say something and make changes. They feel like they are not really represented, and they feel like they are not. They don't have a voice. They don't vote, and our political system failed them. Our corporate university professor David Schultz wrote a great piece at the Counterpunch this morning, today. I just read it. And he is saying that this is really reminiscent of what happened in the 60s and what happened in 69 in the Democratic Convention in Chicago. It's going to happen again. What happened in Kent State in the 70s when 4 students were shot. Also on May 1st, 1970, which is almost tomorrow. Once you get those idiots, police in uniform and guns, of course, things can happen. And the head of Columbia University, this Egyptian American Miss Shafi, I think she has no clue how things are happening. She's just following orders. She thinks she's still in Egypt. She's still following order from Sisi. This is actually happening in the United States. When you see all this police with full gears and military fatigue and uniform and almost like tanks and helicopters and are getting into the campus. This is the sanctuary for the students. They pay money to be there. And here is the police is removing them, and the administration are threatening them, suspension, and businesses saying that we're not going to hire anybody graduates from Columbia. It's just an amazing. But anyway, today we're going to talk to Professor David Schultz. He is a professor of political science, Hamlin University. He is the author of Presidential Swing State, Why Only 10 Matter, published books and articles, and he is saying that history repeats itself, but it's not a tragedy, it's a farce. It's just people are, we know what happened in the 68 resulted that we have Nixon, law and order. They come with this law and order. Same thing with Trump, law and order. Just get the students out of no voice. It looks like a dictatorship. Mayor of New York sounds like an Arab dictatorship. I think you already have here Professor Schultz, and we'll just hear from him. I'll just shut up and listen to the people who know what they're doing, who know what they're talking about. Great article titled Campus Protest and the Corporate University. It's all about money. It's all about money, David.
Hello there. It's all about money.
It's money the root of,
money the root of all evil?
So what's really new about all this? This is really, it looks like a third world country. The campus, I've been in the campus in Egypt in the 70s, and the police was surrounding, there was a protest also to force Sadat to start liberating Sinai. Well, Sinai was occupied, and the police came and surrounded the campus for days, but they never entered the campus.
Hmm.
And so, it's been more than 2 weeks now. The protest is spreading all over campus, from the South Texas to East Columbia, Ivy League, State University, you name it. Students are there. And you wrote a piece, a counterpunch, trying to kind of allude that history repeats itself, but this time it's not really a tragedy, but a farce. Take us through this student protest, and I don't like how the media try to to kind of misrepresent the protest like a Pepsi and Coke campaign, pro-Israelis and pro-Palestinian. It's not a pro-Israeli, pro-Palestinian. This is anti-war, anti-genocide, and I don't know what pro-Israelis are asking for. More killing and more genocide. So take us about the similarity and the dissimilarity
Sure.
about this protest. Start with the students themselves. Are they similar to the 60s and anti-Vietnam War? What the makeup of the students changes with the social media? They don't rely on traditional media anymore. They have access to other information than what Walter Cronkite is going to tell them.
Let's take
So
us back to the 1960s first, in terms of the campus protests, and it was also not against a war; it was against a policing action, but it was a war, of course. It was the Vietnam War, and a couple things to think about here. Back in the 1960s, the protests. Remember, the voting age was 21 at that point, so we're looking at students at that point who, if they were 18, 19, 20 years old, they don't even have a voice in the political system. So they can't go to the ballot box. They can't go cast a vote to try to influence public policy. They're also, for males, they're facing conscription and draft to go to the war, and they're facing institutions that were largely unresponsive to what they wanted to do. And what happened there when they came out to protest the Vietnam War, what we saw first were the college administrators either ignoring them, or B, they started to crack down. And then you got people like Ronald Reagan, you got Governor Rhodes in Ohio, and eventually Richard Nixon, who all said, we need to get tough on these people. We need to do what? The law and order approach. And what, of course, culminates in that approach is May 1st, 1970. It's Kent State. It's when Governor Rhodes calls out the National Guard, and the National Guard, kills, what's the great song here? 4 dead in Ohio, that are happening here. Fast forward us now, over 50 years later, what are we getting? We're getting students who are also protesting American foreign policy. They're protesting American support for Israel, and they're also protesting the killings that are going on, the genocide that is going on, in the Gaza Strip. They have a right at public universities to express their views. There's no question about it. They have a right to, under free speech, to express their views. But what we're seeing is the script being played all over again. We're seeing universities now arresting the demonstrators. We're seeing calls, for example, by Donald Trump, by Speaker Johnson, to bring out the National Guard. In some ways, it's playing all over again. But what's happened in a 50-year plus difference is universities have gotten, I guess, both smarter and dumber. Dumber in the sense they haven't figured out that repression doesn't silence people. Smarter in the sense that they've built up corporate structures. They've built up more top-down systems for control as a way of trying to address disagreement. But also, and I think this is tremendously affecting what's happening on campuses right now, is that as the universities became corporate, they sought outside funding, they sought corporate donors, and to a large extent, they are now, that is the universities, they are being pushed, pushed by donors, donors who don't agree with the content of the speech by the students, and they are pushing them to take certain types of action.
Have corporate universities and you have corporate media. And what do the students have? This is whatever happened to academic freedom. And so, what are the means that the student have to let their voice heard?
Well, that becomes the issue here is that potentially, yes, the voting booth, but as we know across the country, states have made it increasingly harder in the last couple of years, again, for young people to vote. On campus, it should be the opportunity to be able to talk in class. It should be what we used to call teach-ins. It should be the ability to do what? At a public university, especially, to be able to hang out in the commons, to express your views and so forth. But what we're seeing here is at the public universities like the University of Minnesota, when students are peacefully voicing their views and setting up little encampments as kind of like sit-in demonstrations. Classic, I'm going to argue, nonviolent protest. Nonviolent protest in the sense of saying uh, that they want to express their views. Schools are using a variety of means of saying you're illegally camping, you're trespassing to try to remove them. Now, the reason why I emphasize the peaceful, I always tell my students that there's four people I admire tremendously. It's the early 1960s. It's four African American students who walk up to a lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina, at a time of segregation. And they peacefully sit at the lunch counter and they say, "We'd like a cup of coffee." And they're arrested. Now, I understand they're arrested and they're there and it's a private place and they're protesting. But the point that I'm getting at is that we have a long tradition of recognizing peaceful protest as a form of let's say legitimate speech. I'm seeing universities across the country, the public ones, not respecting them. And here's the other thing to think about. Think about Columbia University. Columbia is a private school. It can do whatever it wants. And that's what universities are doing. They, on the one hand, say, we're open, we're free, we have academic freedom, we're all about the free exchange of ideas. But we don't want to hear these ideas. We don't want to hear ideas that threaten our soul. We don't want you to question where our endowments are. We don't want you to know about how we're investing our money and who our relationships were. So yes, you can have freedom of speech and freedom of inquiry, but it's in a little box as opposed to the bigger, like using a metaphor of a bigger box of saying, here's full free speech and inquiry. You know, what's so fascinating as I've been thinking about this, back in the 1960s, people like Herbert Marcuse and Robert Paul Wolfe talked about how what was the hallmark of American society back then? It was called repressive, and they coined a phrase, repressive tolerance. The idea that we will tolerate speech up to a certain point, and if it grows beyond that, we'll repress it. So you've got speech, but this much, not this much.
So the problem is really a structural problem.
Yes.
It's not it's not the encampment, it's not how the students conduct themselves, it's just the fact university becoming an economic institution and follows by money and investment. They're not an educational, socially responsible institution anymore.
Yes.
So what you talked about the lesson of the 60 is lost on the
Yes.
educator and lost even on the politicians. So is this going to happen again? How is this going to affect the political process landscape? I mean, we're going to have the same thing. Democratic convention is going to be in Chicago,
That's
the
right.
same thing, same place. So
Well, again, you're right. I mean, what's that other phrase? History doesn't repeat itself; it rhymes. And there's a sense in which it's going to rhyme this time again. Because you're right. The ironies of the fact that what in 1968 the protests went to Chicago with the Democratic National Convention, and Mayor Daley sent out his thugs and beat up eventually what was called the Chicago Seven. It sets up Richard Nixon to run as the law and order candidate against a Hubert Humphrey, who never could figure out whether he was for the war or against the war, or was he against the war before he was for it? I'm not sure, where he was. But we're setting up the exact same thing here. Is that Biden? I actually don't know how much wiggle room Biden truly has as a person at this point, or as a president. I mean, the interrelationship between the United States and Israel is so what cemented together. I honestly don't know. Even if he wanted to say we're going to separate ourselves from Israel, I don't know how much leverage he really has on Netanyahu in Israel at this point. Yeah, we probably should be thinking about how much we're going to arm the Israelis and how much we're going to keep shipping to them. But where Biden is also trapped is that he views, as America does, Israel as what, the strongest ally, in the Middle East for us. And there's a sense in which, if we go too far, have we alienated what we consider to be an important ally, and therefore have left them out the hang? Biden has to worry about losing the Jewish vote on the one hand if he goes too much in terms of abandoning Israel. On the other hand, if he doesn't come out and take some type of action, does he risk losing the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, as well as young people who he needs to have for a vote? Biden's stuck. He's truly stuck. And I'm going to say he's stuck as a consequence of what? 50, 60 years of U.S. foreign policy. I mean, this is not just sort of, oh, stink, something happened last October. Can we undo the last 6 months? We're talking about taking us back, I don't know. Would you
Yeah,
go as
yeah.
far as, I was going to say, I might take it back as far as 1947.
Yeah, the idea that he's going to lose the Jewish votes, I mean, assuming the Jew are supporting the genocide or supporting Netanyahu,
Right.
it's not about Netanyahu, it's not about the Jewish vote. This is about, as you alluded to, about our biggest asset, a military base in the Middle
Right.
East, Israel.
Yes.
It's a
Yeah.
colonial project that are serving our interests. I also the students, uh, and I'm surprised it's lasting that long, and they're resisting all the pressure on them, and they are not acting like a consumer who want to pay their loans and they pay their tuition and all of that. These are people are fed up with foreign policy, with what's happening in the last over 6 months of killing almost 40,000 Palestinians and genocide, destroying a whole city. So it's not really about money anymore. It's not really about politics anymore. This is an issue about human tragedy, and it's they are connecting to university all over the world, and not just the United States.
Right, exactly. The other thing that I find fascinating right now is the way the corporate media is painting the story. It's about what? Supposedly about violence, it's about takeovers and so forth. What's being missed here? And we talked about this before. Remember several months ago when a complaint was filed in the International Court of Justice saying that there's a possibility of genocide, and all the corporate media, on the part of Israel, and all the corporate media, the New York Times all dismissed it and said, "Oh, this is ridiculous." And then the International Court of Justice came back and said, probable cause that genocide is occurring, and ordered Israel to stop taking action. Again, the corporate media says, oh, the court did not rule against Israel. They've downplayed that. What's being downplayed here again also, and tell me if you disagree on this one, is what's being downplayed here is what? The discussion of genocide. What the corporate media is focusing on is the quote, the lawlessness of the demonstration, the encampments. They're not focusing on the message or the grievance.
But you talked about the grievance against the United States and support for war, they, and against university whom this is, you talk about the student, whom they see as accomplice, they're going to invest with Israel, they are
Right.
accomplice in a genocide. They demand a voice, call for the investment, or simply want to express the disagreement. This is not anti-Semitic. But they're not
No,
going to
it's
buy
not.
this anymore.
Yeah, it's not anymore. And the thing is, what I find ironic here, and I know you and I taught together for many years at Hamlin in a business school, and one of the things that we both know is that one of the movements that occurred in the 1970s, when it was apartheid South Africa, there was the push for what was called the Sullivan Principles and the whole idea that corporations ought to be socially responsible. And to a large extent, we've come to expect, although not well, we've come to expect Coke, Pepsi, um, fill in the blank. They're supposed to be socially responsible entities. Well, aren't universities supposed to be socially responsible? And partly the demand for the students right now is saying, hey, we want to know how how our tuition dollars are being invested. We want to know how the endowments that you have, what are they being invested in? Are they is the school living up to its principles? Is this an institution that we believe is an institution that is acting in a socially responsible fashion? That I think is the first message. The first, or one of the messages that's coming out of these protests, is to say, damn it, we mean it. We mean it. We want to know um, that you are how you're acting. Are you living up to your principles and values? And what's happening right now, I think schools are being tested on speech, tested on principles, tested about the principles of diversity.
Yeah.
And if I can speak like a professor, I think the schools are failing. I think the school, the Columbias, the Yales, the University of Minnesota's, they're failing at the most basic level to live up to their principles.
How is your university in Hamlin? What's going on there?
Well, what's interesting is that there's a small encampment in front of Old Main. We have kind of, if people who don't know Hamlin, we've got kind of like a little quad. Old Main um is the administration building. And there's about 4 or 5 tents out there, and it's very peaceful. There's posters all over the administration building. And so far, I give my university credit. They're not taking any action in terms of going after, they're not trying to break it up. There's a student petition, though, a student petition that they're also asking faculty to sign, asking the university, because we're a private university, to disclose where our endowment is invested, and depending on what the answer is, to then disinvest from Israel. I think my school will probably let the tents go, let them just not care about it, because that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
What really means something is the disclosure of the investments and the disinvestment. That I would be surprised if my university or many universities across the country actually disclose that.
Do you guys have a president yet?
We have still an acting president at this point, who will be acting as president for at least another 18 months.
Is he acting anything now? Or she?
It's hard to tell. I don't know. I don't know. The
Okay. Well, we don't want
my
to get you in trouble. But
That's right.
do you talk to your students? Or what would what kind of question
Oh,
they ask?
well, my student, and this is perfectly okay. And I'm teaching 3 classes this semester at Hamlin, and I'm going to say in all 3 of the classes, rightly so, we've interrupted the class to talk about these issues, which is good. I mean,
Yeah.
the thing, I mean, I will say this is far more important to talk about than me flipping another page of something on public policy or something like that. Uh, and what I wish we were having, and one of the things that I don't see across the country right now, like we did in the 1960s, they used to call them teach-ins, is that there would be basically faculty, students, and there would be like people would converge somewhere and and again talk about the issues, to discuss them or something like that. So to the extent that I my students are interested, and they are very, very interested, They are very, very engaged on this issue. And it's not just my students who are, let us say, Palestinian, across across the board. My white Caucasian students, African American, Hispanic, wherever they may be, they are interested in this question because on one level, it's not just about Israel. It's not just about Palestine. Again, going back to it, it's about our schools and universities, public institutions, or should be viewed like public institutions and viewed as socially responsible. And should they be accountable, at least in some way, shape, or form, to the constituents that they serve? That's the broader issue here. Is about how we view higher education and universities in American democracy.
Well, it doesn't look like a higher education, David. It looks like a lower education to me.
Yes, yes.
I'm sorry, but Professor David Schultz, Professor of Political Science at Harvard University here in St. Paul, wrote a piece in Counterpunch. Check it out. Campus protest and the corporate university, corporate media, and this is the life we're living in. And university institution learned the lesson from the 60s, the last 50 years.
We hope
Thank you
so.
again.
It might take another 50 years, but they might finally learn it.
Okay, eventually we're
Okay.
gonna learn something. Thank you so much, David. We'll talk to you later then.
Bye.
Bye.